Well, we know that daffodils are not native to the United States. They aren't invasive, mind you, but when it comes to creating food for our own lovely pollinators and their little offspring, daffodils really don't do much. Pretty to look at, but a veritable lifeless ecological deadweight to our own ancient North American ecological communities. So in my video on whether daffodils are native to North America, I gave some native plant alternatives to daffodils. Well, here's some of those same options and a whole bunch more. So this is how we're going to roll. I'll start with native flowers that come up early in the spring and are yellow, like daffodils, and then I'll move into some flowers that come up early in the spring but are not yellow. And just as a side note, all of these native flowers are perennial, so that means they'll come up year after year. Okay, so the first couple that I have for you come up early in the spring. They're yellow, and they're what I think are your closest bets to daffodils, although that is somewhat subjective. So this is the large-flowered bellwort, Uvularia grandiflora. So this flower often makes little clumps, which make them look very nice in a formal garden. But little clumps like this also do look quite eye-catching in a more natural or wild setting, if that is your thing. And after they bloom, the greenery will stick around all summer, so that's nice. Next is the Blue Ridge Buckbean, or the Carolina lupine, so Thermopsis caroliniana. These little darlings have a very sturdy taproot. They are a little taller, maybe 3 to 5 feet, but they are heavily reminiscent, to me anyways, of daffodils. These next ones are early and yellow. So this first one is Marsh Marigold, or Caltha palustris. So these are often found in wet, marshy places, hence the name Marsh Marigold, but they can be in your yard too. If you've got a spot that is maybe more wet than not, maybe this is just what you need. Okay, this next one is the Celandine Poppy, Stylophorum diphyllum. So I'm really biased here. We had a couple of these come up in our yard once. They just showed up, and now they come back every year. They are truly brilliant when you stumble upon them. I love the Celandine Poppy. There is something similar called the greater celandine, and that actually is an invasive plant. So it's really important here to get the native one. And I'll give you links in the description for native plant companies that will for sure give you the native plant. So the Celandine Poppy, very low maintenance, very pretty. They show up in woodlands, usually in ravines. They just kind of pop up in places, and it is a beautiful respite for winter-weary eyes. So, of note, the Celandine Poppy is threatened or endangered in many areas, and so that makes it an extra great choice as an alternative for daffodils, doesn't it? In Canada, actually, its distribution is so low that it is listed under Ontario's Endangered Species Act of 2007. Okay, so this next one is the Eastern Prickly Pear Cactus. Now, I know a cactus does not look like a daffodil, but it is a singular yellow flower, and it does come up very early. So the scientific name here is Opuntia humifusa. And if you're not in a desert, don't worry about it. This plant is actually native to the eastern United States. They form little clumps, and they're really easy to propagate. You just cut one of those little pads off, pop it in the ground, boom, done. So these are, as the other ones, early bloomers, yellow flowers. These are somewhat shorter and smaller, though, than your daffodil. This first lovely little one is the yellow trout lily, Erythronium Americanum. This is truly an ephemeral, meaning that it blooms for a very short time, just a few days. And it can form little clumps, and can take many years to fully form those little clumps. It is a little gentle, delicate flower, but it is very lovely to behold, and it does come up early. This is the yellow prairie violet, Viola nuttallii. This is a threatened species in Minnesota, so the preferred habitat for the yellow prairie violet is kind of dry, sandy, gravelly soil, and that is the preferred type of site for gravel mining or grazing, so that has been the trouble there. You can find it more commonly in the western United States and the mid-United States. Viola nuttallii is one of the larval host plants of a handful of butterflies. So a larval host plant means that the butterflies will lay their eggs on the leaves of the yellow prairie violet. And then when those little caterpillars hatch, they'll eat the little prairie violet leaves. Little symbiotic relationship there. So that's important. So meadow evening primrose or prairie sundrops, Oenothera pilosella. These little cheery sundrops can spread rather quickly. They make these dense mats that are quite fragrant, pollen dense and pollinator filled. They definitely have a UV pattern on the petals to help bring in pollinators. Now, a number of native flowers have UV ultraviolet patterns on the petals, but so does this one, which is kind of neat. The roots are actually pretty shallow, so that does make it somewhat easy to kind of maintain the spreading nature of them if you don't want them to spread their prairie sundrop joy too far. Okay, so I have two separate buttercups here that are both similar in look. They're sort of a short, happy little yellow flower, right? The prime difference between them being the soil moisture that they need. So this first one is called the early buttercup, Ranunculus fascicularis, which likes medium to medium dry soil moisture. And the other one is the swamp buttercup, Ranunculus septentrionalis. And so that one, you don't actually need to live in a swamp, but it does like medium to wet soil moisture. So it's a nice little duo, these two buttercups, because if you like the look of them, you just pick the one that best matches your soil moisture. Okay, so we're going to move on to some early blooming yellow flowers, but these are kind of tiny little flowers that are clustered together, right, as opposed to the singular flower of a daffodil. This first one is the golden groundsel, or the golden ragwort, Packera aurea. Pardon me. So this one has fibrous roots with rhizomes, so it can spread semi-aggressively. People will often use it for a ground cover, and it really, really delivers a golden glow. And this one is the golden Alexanders, Zizia aurea. And aren't they lovely? My gosh. Golden Alexanders are the larval host for a few butterflies. So again, that would be the adult butterfly will lay eggs on the leaves of this plant, and then the little caterpillars hatch and will eat the leaves for food. So an important role for a plant. And this is interesting. There is a mining bee species where the female bee will only eat pollen from this specific flower and only this flower. All right, so we're going to move to flowers that come up early in the spring, but they're not necessarily yellow, because some daffodils are not yellow, and maybe you're not married to yellow. So all right, bum-ba-da-dum, I present to you the earliest bloomer of the year, sharp-lobed hepatica. So Hepatica acuta loba. And it is the plant that keeps on giving all year long, Clark. It has these really nice red leaves in the fall time, right? So you get this very, very early flower and these nice green leaves. And then in the fall time, they turn red. Beauty. And for the medical people in the peanut gallery, it is named hepatica because the leaves are liver-shaped. So one source I read indicated that sharp-lobed hepatica was harvested to near extinction at one time in our country's history because it was believed to heal liver problems due to its liver shape. The idea was liver-shaped leaves will solve liver problems in people. Side note, did not work. Okay, so these are more early blooming flowers, not yellow, similar to daffodil in shape. So this is the white trout lily, Erythronium albidum, and this delicate little flower is a spring ephemeral, meaning that it blooms for a very short time, just a couple days. And from seed, if you grow it from seed, it can be years before it'll even bloom. And it does form these really nice clumps, but that can take many years, even possibly decades, to happen. And so this tells us that when you see big clumps of these white trout lily in the wild, that area has been unforested and undisturbed for a really long time. So moist but well-drained soil and shade is imperative for this little darling. So, she is a delicate little flower, but and this is cool, she is a very robust nutrient reservoir. It turns out the white trout lily blooms so early that those early spring rains and nutrients run over the ground, and they would be totally lost, except that the white trout lily catches those nutrients and uptakes them, stores them in the leaves. And so then in the summertime, when that white trout lily, when those leaves drop, all of those captured nutrients from the early spring rains go into the soil and help fertilize all the little neighboring plants around. Isn't that awesome? So she is a delicate little flower, but she does have a robust, unexpected side. Also of note, that invasive garlic mustard plant has also made this little white trout lily threatened in many areas. All right, so here's Solomon's seal, Polygonatum biflorum. Now I know some people might disagree with me, but when I see a bunch of Solomon's seal clumped up in a planting, it is suggestive to me of a clump of daffodils, which is why I have this plant here listed as a daffodil alternative. So it has these big purplish, bluish seeds and golden leaves that are lovely in the fall time, so it's another one of those gives all year round. And it does quite well in woodlands and at the base of trees. The shooting stars. I have 2 shooting stars for you to consider. The first here is the southern or dark-throated shooting star, Dodecatheon pulchellum. So it is an ephemeral, meaning it doesn't bloom for very long, and all of the foliage will die back. It's a very cool shaped flower though, right? And so this next one is the amethyst or the jeweled shooting star, Dodecatheon amethystinum. So it is delightfully fragrant in bloom, somewhat rare to find. It's isolated to a few spots in the United States. So limestone hills and valleys of the Midwest, damp, calcium-rich cliffs and stream banks, and then there's a disconnected population in the Appalachian region. So it is a plant, it's not endangered, but it is of concern in some areas. It's kind of tough because this plant has a really small range as it is, and then disrupted habitat kind of make it even harder to find now. So it's not endangered, but it's not particularly common to find either. Oh my goodness. Virginia bluebells, Mertensia virginica. Oh, seeing a bunch of these gently blowing in the early spring breeze surely gets a heart twitterpated. So it can grow into these big clumps, and the blooms on it can last for weeks. They start as this light pink, they go through purple, and they make their way to their signature blue, which I really think is more of a purple. I might be colorblind, but that is my problem. If you absolutely cannot imagine getting rid of your stupid daffodils, these are a really great flower to plant around your daffodil clumps. So the yellow of the daffodils and then the purple of the Virginia bluebells, or the blue, together they are breathtaking. And whereas the daffodils won't do jack squat for our American pollinators, the bluebells will be a lovely early spring feast for them. Also of note, Virginia bluebells are tolerant of black walnut trees, which, if you have a black walnut tree, you know what I'm talking about. You can plant these around that tree and it's no problem. Okay, so more early blooming flowers that are not yellow, but are also kind of short and small. So this is the false rue anemone, Isoprium bidernatum, and it's another ephemeral because it completely dies back by summertime. And like a lot of these flowers, it is somewhat in trouble due to the highly invasive garlic mustard plant. This is the twin leaf, Jeffersonia diphylla. So leaves are around all summer on it, which looks nice. So this plant looks a lot like bloodroot, which I'll show you next, but it is distinct by its leaves. The delicate flowers are truly delicate. Raindrops can make them fall off, or even a stiff wind. It is actually endangered in some areas due to habitat destruction and invasive species, the usual suspects. And so this is bloodroot, Sanguinaria canadensis. And so it's a little shorter than that twin leaf, and it can withstand some sun. It has a lovely fragrance. The stem and roots have this red-colored liquid in it, hence bloodroot. Shade and well-drained soil are both key for this plant. Just like those Virginia bluebells, bloodroot is black walnut tolerant. The flowering only lasts a couple of days, and this flower opens in the day and closes at night, which is cool. And it is certainly an ephemeral because the foliage will be gone by summertime, which is in contrast to the twin leaf I had showed you, which has leaves that are around all summer. So the wild geranium, Geranium maculatum. So it can spread to form these really nice patches, which I have seen in somebody's yard. Their whole front yard was this small hill, and it had these big rocks in it. And so what they did is they interspersed wild geranium sort of around all these rocks, and then the wild geranium spread just a little bit to form these nice little patches. The effect was really quite lovely. So even though they form patches, wild geranium is not particularly aggressive. It is usually busy with bees and butterflies. They bloom for about a month, which is nice. And the seeds, this is neat, are attached to a little structure that catapults the seeds away from the parent plant when they're ready. Kapoom! So that is neat to see. Well played, Mother Nature. Well played. Okay, this is Spring Beauty, Claytonia virginica. So the coloration on these petals almost makes it look like people have been hybridizing and tinkering around with it. But alas, no. The native Spring Beauty has petals that look just like this. So it's not super rare because it handles degraded, disturbed habitats reasonably well, which is nice. And it can be used as a ground cover because it will also spread into some patches. More early blooming flowers that are not yellow. I have two here that are sort of singular flowers, kind of like the daffodil. It's just a singular flower on a stem, right? So this first one is red trillium, or purple trillium, Trillium erectum. So this blooms for about 3 weeks. It can form nice clumps over a few years. Like a lot of these native plants, when you see them in a little clump or a patch, it is so striking. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention to you, red trillium has a foul or unpleasant odor. And the point of that is that it is used to attract the plant's primary pollinators, which are carrion flies and carrion beetles. Although some people say it's merely the smell of a wet dog. It's not putrid. Don't worry about it. So that'll be for you to decide. Interestingly, it was once used to treat gangrene, as the putrid smell of gangrene is similar to the putrid smell of this flower. Same smell, so obviously the flower can treat gangrene. Obviously, did not work. In some states, red trillium is actually endangered, threatened, or in some places vulnerable. So next up is another trillium, and this is usually the trillium that people are talking about when they just say trillium. There's actually a few different kinds, but this is a popular kind. So this is Trillium grandiflorum. It is long-lived but slow to mature, and it is an ephemeral, so the foliage of this will die back to the ground by midsummer. And this is another one that can look really, really nice, interspersed with daffodils if you're not going to pull those non-native daffodils out entirely. And actually, this white trillium also looks really nice interspersed with those Virginia bluebells. So like, can you imagine this beautiful patch of like white trillium and Virginia bluebells, that white and that purple blue, and then if you just got to have the daffodils in there, the yellow daffodils, like it's very eye-striking, right? And finally, in the end here, I have a flower for you that is not an early bloomer. This will not come up early, per se, but it is yellow, and it's a very bright, happy yellow like a daffodil, should that be what your interest is with daffodils. And this is called lanceleaf coreopsis, or Coreopsis lanceolata. So it'll bloom for many weeks. It is somewhat drought tolerant, which is really nice on some of those very hot, dry summers. It can become sort of leggy at times, so a lot of stem with nothing on it, and then you start getting the leaves and the flowers on top. Sometimes though, right? And so different people kind of say different things. My experience has been what some people say, which is, oddly, some years it does not come up in abundance, and then other years it does come up in abundance, and I can't always figure what is deciding whether it will come up in abundance or not. So it's not always a reliable perennial, meaning like you'll always get these big gorgeous clumps. Sometimes a little bit less comes up, and I'm not sure why. But they can grow into clumps, and obviously it has a very, very cheery yellow to it, and it is usually busy with little pollinators, which is nice to see. All right, so those are the daffodil replacements that I have for you that are early bloomers and are native to North America. So if you're getting on the wagon here and you're deciding to purchase some seeds, plants, or bare roots of some of these beautiful, really beautiful native plants, be absolutely sure to use the scientific name when you look them up to purchase. Steer clear of hybrids or cultivars of the native plant. So 2 native plant companies that I truly trust to deliver all native plants, raised properly, no hybrids, are Prairie Moon Nursery and Prairie Nursery. Similar names, 2 different companies. Now, I don't get anything from these companies to praise them, but they are so easy to praise. They are really great companies. So the scientific names and common names of everything you saw here is in the video description, as well as links to those 2 native plant companies that I trust. So, ditch the non-native daffodils and start showing off what natural beauty our own continent has to offer.